I'm now ready to read questions from our audience. Again, to our audience members, please do join the conversation. Type in your questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them. Please address them to all panelists so we'll be able to read. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. We'd also like to inform you that Director Kaloy Reyes will also be available to answer questions on behalf of the DICT Cybersecurity Bureau. All right, we have question number 1, and this is for Mr. Lito Averia. The question is, does the assessment provided by Secure Connections also cover the COMELEC security infrastructure? What policies can the government implement to ensure the integrity of elections? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. It's quite a question. We did a general assessment of government agencies as a whole, not on specific government agencies. But what we did was to launch a survey. We conducted a survey through the DICT, and we are just collating the results of the survey today. So we'll come up with another report specifically on covering the survey questions that we had. What policy, with regards to the policy environment, again, we are pushing minimum information security standards as a starting point. And then depending on the levels of and criticality of the government agencies, the ones that are running critical infrastructure specifically, and mission critical systems. Election systems, of course, are mission critical. Although this is a one-day affair, preparing for that and securing the election systems is really critical. So depending on the levels of criticality, then the government agencies should adopt higher levels of security beyond the minimum information security standards that we are pushing.
Lito, earlier, William said that the bar has been set so low. And I know that you're conducting an assessment of government agencies and the results are just about to come in. But based on the latest assessment that you did, how would you rate our cybersecurity preparedness for these government agencies from your perspective? I mean, a malicious actor wants to attack now. How prepared are we? Are our government agencies on a rate of 1 to 10?
That's a sad state of affairs, right? On cybersecurity.
How sad?
Right now, I was just reading about the press release of NAPOCOR. The dam information management system has been attacked about 19 hours ago. So that gives us an indication of the preparedness of our government agencies, especially the ones that are running critical or regulating critical infrastructures, right? So it would be difficult to put a number to it, but I guess relatively it's still low, the readiness.
And I'm very curious, Lito, if you look around us, which country would you think can be a model, a best practices model for preparedness of governments when it comes to cybersecurity?
There's a number. Well, if you talk about the ASEAN region, there's Singapore, right? Okay. To include, of course, our Asian neighbors, Japan would also be. They have a strong practice in terms of cybersecurity. Globally, the number one I can cite is Estonia.
Estonia.
Yes. They're the most wired country in the world, and they're the most advanced in terms of cybersecurity practice.
Wow. It's a very small European country, Estonia. Right. Okay, we learn something new every day. Thank you, Lito, for that. We have another question here. This one is for Dr. William Yu. William, is there data on the existing levels of cybersecurity workforce technical capacity in the Philippines?
Right. That's another good question, and actually that's a question that has been asked recently, so I could guess who asked the question. But anyway, as a whole of country statistics and information, we have a lot of information with respect to the number of IT graduates, the people who have taken IT courses, and the people who probably taken information security courses. We also do have information about how many people take certifications. Now, the problem we have here in the Philippines is it's not really consolidated, right? Having that in one place and seeing like what is the state of IT awareness or IT security capability here is not that easy to find, right? So that's the first statement. The second statement is we're not big fans of certification. So we don't see a lot of IT practitioners. I know a lot of really, really good cybersecurity professionals who don't have the alphabet soup after their names, right? So that one also makes it harder to measure, right? Because they can be quite good. They actually work in fields that are very relevant and they do their jobs well, but they don't have the alphabet soup in their name. Therefore, when we do a survey or we take statistics, we don't see that. Now, the job hunting sites, for example, will also keep track of these things, but this would be in the context of private employment. So I think that's one of the areas that needs improvement as well. Because if we're going to require a lot of these policies, we need to be able to staff them. And that's the reason why whenever we think of policy solutions, even though it is just minimum information security standards, right, we still need people to enforce and help the agencies and organizations through that. So that's one of the challenges that we think should be looked at, right? I am pretty sure that a lot of agencies would step up to the task. For example, the ICT does have a group that watches that. They do it already in the context of the BPO and ITO industry. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to expand that to information security. Just a few thoughts in mind. Thank you.
So, William, based on the tangible data that you have, the obvious and the not so obvious data that you have, would you say we have a deep bench for cybersecurity talent here in the Philippines?
We have a potentially deep bench, right? So we do have a very highly IT literate population for sure. We adapt to technology very, very well, right? We actually do supply a lot of IT professionals, not just for our own needs, but for the export market. So definitely the potential bench is there. Now, what we do lack, for example, is we do lack specifics, right? So for example, cybersecurity in particular, how would we count the number of cybersecurity professionals vis-a-vis regular information security professionals? The canonical way of doing that is to count certifications. But since we don't take a lot of that, right, it's hard to count. So right now, that's our gap, because the more traditional ways, how many people have this cybersecurity certification, that cybersecurity certification, that's not a very big number now. So that's why I add the word potential, because I think the talent is there, the capability is there, the willingness is there, but being able to quantify it more needs a lot more work. But I do believe it is an initiative that just wait and see. Maybe when we have another launch for another event, that is one of the key topics that is being worked on right now.
All right. And to talk about how you turn that potential into a reality, this question is for Grace. How can schools better help in raising cybersecurity awareness among the youth who can then share knowledge with their respective families?
Thanks for that question. Actually, I would say we have to start at home first, no? Target the parents and the guardians, the adults at home, in raising awareness about basic cyber hygiene. You saw in the video earlier, you have to strengthen your password, these basic things. Be cautious about sharing your personal information, especially on social media. As we wrote in an article recently, in the comfort of our homes, we buy products using online, using apps that are electronically linked to our bank account. And the same account is used to load cash in our mobile wallet attached to our phone number, which is then verified using an email address that we use to log in to our social media account. So as you can imagine, if one platform is hacked, all others can easily be affected. And since students are in their homes and the parents are using their accounts to coordinate with the school and use it for their online classrooms, and then all of these things can be compromised. So I would say that start at home. But in terms of schools, we need to incorporate cybersecurity in formal education. We can start actually in basic education with remote learning right now. Even my preschooler is already aware of, how to use online platforms. We should get the buy-in of the DepEd, definitely, the school administration and the parents, as I mentioned. And I think teaching digital natives, which is essentially all our children, is now easier. My 6-year-old, for example, knows more about YouTube than me. So I mean, he's more the expert than me when it comes to manipulating these online platforms. So and I think that in fact some schools are already doing this practice of cyber hygiene and raising awareness because of online learning. And we then have to institutionalize this not only in the schools, but the DepEd should have probably a policy that can be adopted by all schools nationwide. Thanks for the
Wow,
question.
Grace, your 6-year-old is now a master of YouTube, and here I am still struggling to remember the last password I used for the change password for my banking account. Anyways, here's another question. This one is for Director Caloy Reyes. The question is, what steps are the DICT and law enforcement agencies in the Philippines taking in order to prevent, prosecute, and punish cyber crimes, as well as to provide relief to victims of cyber crimes? Director Caloy?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good question. Actually, we have this National Cybercrime Cybersecurity Interagency Committee led by the Executive Secretary of the Department of ICT, and the National Security Advisors as the co-chairs. We have delineated functions relative to the prevention. The ICT, its partner or its sister agencies such as the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center, the National Privacy Commission, has the respective mandates to follow. In terms of law enforcement, specifically on investigation, we have our partners such as the Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group and the National Bureau of Investigations. For the matter of prosecution, we have been partnering with the Department of Justice and the National Prosecution Service. So end-to-end, we have this already, and the delineation of functions for each have been cleared. So hopefully our citizens would somehow know already where and what to report if in case they have been attacked, especially those victims of cybercrimes. So cybersecurity will be more focused on the DICT, while the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center, including that of the law enforcement, handles cybercrime. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cole. Just a quick follow-up. I'm very curious, would you have an idea or data as to the number of cases, cybercrime cases, that the government, the DICT or DILG handle at any given point? And what is the success rate of prosecution?
Typically,
are we able to successfully?
Yeah, go ahead. The statistics belongs more to the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordination Center and the law enforcement agencies. Though, just to remind everybody, it's an exponential rate really. So we need really to be careful and be protective and think twice before you join or click anything.
Exponential growth in the number of cybercrimes handled. What's the success rate? Do we know, sir? Is it a 10% success rate in prosecution of these crimes? And what are the punishments? Maybe it's just a slap in the hand. Maybe we need, laws or policies, punishments with more teeth.
Yeah, again, it's more on the cybercrime issue, and I think the better agency to have this address is the cybercrime investigation. Though we have the punishment and prosecution is very clear in RA 10175. So I guess it's more on the law enforcement institutions.
All right, thank you, Director Caloy. Here's another question. This time, this is for William and for Grace. What is the best way for someone to get started on learning cybersecurity skills? So what's the best way, Grace and William?
Grace, ladies first.
No, please. No, go ahead, William. You're a practitioner, so you'll know better.
All right. So So basically, it depends on what you're going to do it for, right? So for example, if you want to be a practitioner, the path is fairly different from if you're just a regular user of information technology. Let's start with the regular user of information technology. Now, there are many websites, there are many contents, there are many courses meant for regular users. So for example, the United States CISA will actually have websites specific for example, what will a small business do with respect to information security, or what would an individual do with respect to information security. Now, these courses focus more on cyber hygiene. The UK actually has a cybersecurity center that has their portal has different sites specific to particular target audiences. So, for example, they have one specifically for small businesses alone. Small business practitioner. These are the things that you can do. These are the things that you can follow. Now, that one is one way, right? And I think we don't even have to dig really, really deep. I think there are some very, very practical things like, not writing down your password. Maybe that's one of the things that I leave for you, right? Don't do that, right? And longer is better. There are things like that actually work out. Now, that's on one end, but I think the question is more focused on cybersecurity professional. So in terms of cybersecurity professional, this goes back to the question a while ago about measures, how many cybersecurity professionals we have in the Philippines. Certifications are still, I have to admit, they're not the ultimate basis of whether you're good or not, but it actually helps us measure. So I think, taking these cybersecurity certifications is actually a good first step. Now, in the Philippines, we have a lot of people who actually take this, and we do have organizations, I'm part of two, for example, that will promote this, but I think we need more. Now, the nice thing about a certification program is it has a base framework, right? It will cover enough of certain aspects of cybersecurity and information technology to get you going. It will not make you an expert overnight, but at least it covers the breadth, right? So that's the second one. Now, as an additional point, right? So that's for the individual, for individual learning. In addition to that, depending on what sector you're in, there will be sector-specific things that you should know. If you're in the banking and finance sector, PCI-DSS is a good place to start. If you're in the healthcare sector, there is HIPAA, which doesn't apply in the Philippines because it's in the States, but it's a good framework to follow, right? So you can actually look at all of these standards and certifications as a baseline. It actually makes you a better practitioner because there are specific, courses that specific search courses and things that people will look for. So those are the two ends. As an individual and by yourself, or a small business owner, and there is for cybersecurity professional. So not the best answer, the adding alphabet soup letters at the end of your name, but it does help us as a country. It's easier to measure, and it does, at least it's a baseline framework.
Grace?
Yes, actually, I'm a newbie in cybersecurity, but in terms of ICT policy, it's always been the case where skills is always a problem. I would add to what William said, usually when we talk about building skills, we are so centered on the NCR, in the capital, metropolitan cities. I would like to pose a challenge actually to government and to institutions to please look outward. There are many skills out there in the provinces, in the countryside, and we need to make sure that our priorities should not only include the highly urbanized metropolitan centers, but also looking at centers of excellence in the countryside. And that's where I think the challenge is. It's not actually something that we have right now, but we can tap into universities, we can tap into associations, ICT councils and associations in the countryside. So it's a huge challenge, but of course we have to start somewhere.
Just a quick follow-up. I get this impression that the infrastructure is broadly more secure these days, but the people aren't. You can set up the strongest cybersecurity, the walls to protect your company, your business, and then you've got that one employee who clicks on the wrong link, and that's it. It goes down the drain. And on an individual basis, maybe I can ask Grace and William, can you talk to us about social engineering schemes? There are hackers who look at what we post on Facebook, on Instagram, and we're a social media capital of the world. And then they can tailor fit these malicious links that can lure you into clicking something and hacking into your system. Plus emails. I mean, we're 21st century. How are we still getting tricked by emails? So that's the follow-up question for ordinary Filipinos like myself.
So allow me to start. So social engineering is at the core of a lot of cybersecurity exploits nowadays. We may see, for example, in the news, Colonial Pipeline getting hacked, but how did the hacker get in, right? More often than not, it is a social engineering exploit. It was some employee that clicked something that they weren't supposed to click. Now, smishing, phishing, and all the ishing, vishing, there are so many phishings out there already, is becoming more and more popular. And like Grace mentioned at the start of our presentation, there is a social aspect of that, right? The I love you virus and all, the need to belong, right? So that's an important aspect. Now, what we should do is we should be a little more discerning about where these links come from and whether we should click them or not. I think it has just gotten harder because in the past, we didn't have that many opportunities to click on links. In the early days of the internet, it was just email. Now we're bombarded with chat group for this, chat group for that, chat group for this. Then we have SMS from this, SMS from that. Then we have our online shopping channels that attempt to upsell and cross-sell. It is so easy to get confused already now. Now, there are things that we are trying to do as an industry. So, for example, the banking, telco industries are working hard to find ways to make smishing and phishing harder. Right, so we're trying to educate users to say, if this came from the bank, it can't happen. So, for example, Singapore has done an extreme. You cannot, a bank cannot issue an email or a text message with a clickable link. That's no longer possible. That means if you want to do a promo, you have to log into an actual website or your online banking, and you have to go there. There's no convenience link, right? Unlike the normal way of doing these marketing promos, from Bank X, please click on link, that's no longer possible in Singapore. Now, Singapore did one extreme, right? You really cut off convenience, but it's a lot more secure because then you have to log into your internet banking. You're sure it is your internet bank site, right? And it's a lot more secure. But the probability of upselling and cross-selling just become harder.
You mentioned about banks, William. I'm not sure if you guys have experienced this, but I've got some people from the bank calling me on my mobile using a personal number. And they say they're using a bank mandated number. What do you do? From a cybersecurity perspective, and they start asking you, can you confirm that this is your birth date, that this is your mother's maiden name?
Oh, don't do that. So
what do we do?
So I think as a general rule, if somebody calls you that you do not know, do not give personal information, do not give information, period. Right? The only time that information can be called or collected is if there was a transaction, right? That is happening. But even that, I recommend to people, you call the bank. So if somebody calls you, I'm from the bank, we have this transaction for you, but we need that additional information. I normally suggest that they call the bank, especially if it's from an unlisted number and things like that. You'll never know where that comes from. That could just be a phishing attack. That's just masquerading as a bank transaction. Two is you probably know what transactions are, happening. So if you don't expect an inbound forex exceeding $20,000, I don't think you're supposed to be expecting calls like that, right? So there are things that may not be obvious, but it happens. But as a general rule, I just tell people, don't give personal information out over the phone unless you made that call, because it's really hard.
Again, cutting the convenience part, but safer for everybody. Noted. Here's a question for Grace. Grace, cybersecurity policy in the Philippines seems to be more reactive than proactive. Is it still possible for the Philippines to catch up and turn the tide by coming up with policies which anticipate rather than react when a new technology comes out?
Thanks for that question. But Mimi, I'd like to add to what
Go
William
ahead.
said earlier about how we can protect ourselves. No, so William mentioned something about the need to belong, and I love you virus. Preying on the human vulnerability of the need for affection. Nowadays,
We
we
need
also
to
have
forward messages, Grace.
yeah, the need to forward message. Exactly. So related to that, now we also have this, this urge to the need to send instant replies that we're always on. And the pandemic has definitely worsened that for everyone. So usually, William mentioned phishing, smishing. There's also such a thing as CEO fraud and phishing. It's very common in the corporate world, no? So what these social engineers would do is to trick you into acting on something urgent. Otherwise, there will be a consequence. So anything that would ask you to do something immediately because there's a consequence, usually there's a catch there. So what happens is that these social engineers would, usually they would pretend to be, an official of the company, or the CEO is asking you to do this and that. So of course, being the subservient people that we are, we want to instantly respond to these things. So be very careful with that. And Mimi, you also mentioned earlier that the convenience usually would, we fall prey to that, and then we want to do something instantly. We have to think long and hard now about doing shortcuts. QR codes, for example. Do not scan these QR codes that you see everywhere. These are marketing ploys, but you don't know where these QR codes would take you. And you have to realize that unless you know that these QR codes are generated by, legitimate companies, then please do not scan them. Okay, as to the question on about proactive policy, sakit yan everywhere in any country. Usually policymakers would not really want to put policy out there, and they're always behind technological advancements and innovation. I guess we can say that the status quo, if it's working for policymakers and some industry players, they would want to retain that. Anything that is disruptive is, seen as a threat, and it's challenging. But the way we see it is that the consequence of these disruptions, little trickles at that, would eventually amount to something bigger and something more complicated than what we can respond to. So to us, for Secure Connections, the answer would really be putting in place minimum information security standards. Minimum meaning across the board, anyone, whether it's a big company, it's a small organization, in the city or in the province, these are very basic minimum standards that groups of people, institutions can actually apply. And there are many internationally accepted standards out there, and William mentioned them earlier. So we have to make sure that across the board, we are all adopting these standards, and we have to raise awareness about these standards. ISO, of course, is the globally accepted gold standard when it comes to information security, but there are others that would fit the size, the nature, and the level of sophistication that other organizations have. So we just need to push that these minimum standards be institutionalized and become policy. Kumbaga, nasa grade school level tayo, as Sec Manny mentioned to us in one meeting. We're still at the very basic education level. So more and more, as we adopt these minimum standards, we can assess our capability after so many years, and then we can decide through, of course, the leadership of the DICT, whether we are ready to adopt more stringent and higher requirements using standards such as the ISO standard. But essentially, minimum information standards for all, more stringent standards for critical infrastructure.
Grace, just a quick follow-up about minimum information standards. For ordinary Filipinos like myself, we're not techie. sometimes we wonder what happens to the data we give out when it moves on to a third party, a service provider, or another group. For example, earlier this year, so many people went on social media to complain about getting text messages about the same job offers from random numbers. Is that a clear example of hacking? And the number one suspicion that we have, I count myself in this group, is that it probably came from the contact tracing initiatives. I mean, every time I entered a mall, every time I entered a bank, I gave them my name, I gave them some health data, I gave them my number, I gave them my address, I gave them my vaccination status. What do you think? How do you make sense of that?
That's a controversial question. So I'll let William answer it.
Yeah,
William,
so
go ahead, William.
I'll take that.
I'm pretty sure you got a job offer as well. No?
Yes, of course,
Yes.
of course. Yes, yes. So I did, and I was shocked, 50,000 pesos per day.
Yes.
Wow, wonderful. No, back to the point, data, because that's a data leak, right? So that particular incident, it may not have been an actual system that was breached per se, but definitely data was leaked somewhere. Your phone number, my phone number, Grace's phone number was leaked somehow, somewhere. Now, could it be contact tracing? Maybe, but it could also be other things like that promo you filled out or that raffle ticket you joined in a grocery store raffle. There are many places where information can be leaked, right? So jumping to conclusions that it was contact tracing might be premature. It is possible, but it's very hard to tell at this point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is data has been leaked many, many times in many, many places. Even before the Data Privacy Act came to fore, we've already seen information leak. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't illegal at the time. There is a healthy marketplace for buying telephone numbers in the world, right? So these databases can actually be acquired. So that's another point. As a matter of fact, you can even hire marketing agencies that promise, I already have a database of 50 million Filipinos, right? And these campaigns are simply exploiting that, right? You're taking advantage of information that was either legally, illegally acquired somehow, and just managed to find its way to the different places. Now, we've already hit this point where I am assuming by default that my number is out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why every time I get a promo message or a job offer message, I don't pay attention anymore. Right? I've gotten desensitized already because it's gotten so bad. Now, should we tolerate that? I think we shouldn't, right? So as a population, I think we should expect better. Well, hopefully the work at the National Privacy Commission and at the DICT will start to hunt down. And we've seen it. I mean, they are going after, for example, lending institutions with nefarious lending practices, right? They're going after marketing firms that blast call market, right? Some of these, or actually a lot of these, can be traced. Because the thing about online, there's a digital footprint somewhere. So given enough effort and regulatory muscle, they can actually be tracked, right? And the goal is basically you take them down, send a strong signal to the industry that we will not tolerate this. I think it's a good step. Now we as the people, right, we just have to be more discerning, as Grace mentioned, right? We should avoid the need to reply right away, forward right away. I think taking a pause whenever we get this and thinking through it, just even for like 1 minute more, can do wonders versus replying or forwarding right away. And it also helps with the other problem, which is the fake news thing, right? Because fake news spreads because of our desire to forward the message right away. As a matter of fact, I have resisted forwarding messages for quite a while already because of this, right? So again, like that little pause, I think helps as well.
And also, Mimi, just to add, if you do receive these text messages, don't reply. Because then they'll know that your number is active. So they're also keeping tabs of who I used to have. I used to do this practice of trying to respond to these scammers and threatening them that I'll report them to the NTC, to the NPC, NBI. But then I think it was, I don't know if it was William or somebody else in the Secure Connections team that actually cautioned me against answering these text messages.
And
just
maybe,
one other
yeah,
more thing.
go ahead.
Grace raises a good point about not replying, but what you can do is the operators have hotlines and websites where you can report these numbers.
Oh,
So you can actually report, for example, if you get a spam, phishing SMS message from an unknown source that did not identify him or herself properly, you can go to a telco website and just post that number there, right? So they do have an active campaign at the moment to actually try to find these, nefarious actors.
and which leads us to the next question for William. Can you elaborate on the recommendation to establish a Philippine reporting system? Will this mean requiring institutions, whether government or private, to report any threats and attacks experienced, and who gets to act on what said report?
All right. So good question. First off, we're already required to report data breaches, right? So the Data Privacy Act already requires us to report data breaches. As a matter of fact, the Data Privacy Act does have a clause that also requires us to report information security in incidents as well, right? Of course, the threshold and the focus of the Data Privacy Act is mostly for data breaches, but that's also a good thing because when you breach an information system, there's probably personal information there. So we kind of already have something at the moment. So that's my first statement. The second statement is basically the DICT, including the national CERT, already has a framework for reporting, particularly for CII. Right, so there already is a national CERT which is being operated by the Cybersecurity Bureau of the DICT that already does this. They have a CERT itself, so they have a national CERT where you can actually report cybersecurity incidents. They also have sectoral certs that focus on particular sectors. So, for example, the BSP is the sectoral lead for finance and banking. You have the National Telecommunications Commission, which is the sector lead for telecommunications. So there already is a framework for that. As a matter of fact, in my private side of life, I actually already see when we sell an information system to a telecoms company, it's already part of the requirements that we should participate in the cyber drill. We should also report cybersecurity incidents to these sectoral certs. So there is a framework that exists. I think it's more of enforcement because the way it's phrased today is you should report cybersecurity incidents, but most people don't, right? And depending on the strength of the sector lead, some are very strict. Like the BSP is very strict. They actually have a regulation, I think it's 1018, that requires you to report a cybersecurity incident within 48 hours. So for example, that's a very strict one. But other sectors may not even have a sector lead, for example. So again, different parts of the country, different levels of maturity.
All right. You mentioned telcos, William. Is it time for government to mandate all SIM cards to be registered, you think? Will registering all SIM cards instead of selling an unlimited number of prepaid cards with no accountability, should that be pursued seriously by the next administration? That's going to cut a lot of the problems, I can imagine.
Well, we're already at this point where the law is already out there, right? I mean, I think it's just waiting for the president's signature. So the SIM card registration act has already been passed. Now, there are some challenges with the act. I mean, the intention is good, but again, the other side of the equation is you create a single path where that information is there as well, right? So again, that is also a juicy target for information breaches and the like. I mean, if you were already concerned about contact tracing, what more about the SIM card registration database, right? So that one is something we should take note of. Now, I am a firm believer in attestation, right? Who you should be who you say you are. Now, there are grades of attestation, like if you are a bank or a commercial institution that needs to reach out to its subscribers, then there should be a way for to know that that bank is really who the bank says it is. So that one I think is important. Now, the law has a lot of problems in my view. I mean, the social media prohibition I think was premature. it's very hard to enforce, that it may make the whole law challenging to enforce. So
Mhm.
I think there are things that can be focused on. I think it's a good, I think the intention is good, but how it will be implemented will really have to see.
All right. We don't have much time. I just wanted to throw in this final question. Big picture question now. You know, the Philippines is making a pitch to become a data center hub for Southeast Asia. We want big companies to, you know, move their data centers here, which means we're going to be handling a ginormous amount of data, critical data. In fact, Globe Telecom just announced making a $350 million joint venture with its parent Ayala Corp and the Singapore-based company to set up this side of the business. Are we ready? Is the Philippines ready? And we are seeing a leadership change in about 2 months. What do you think should be? I know we've listed down a lot of recommendations, but for the next president, what should be the first thing they do for cybersecurity? What should be their first act of business for cybersecurity? So 2 things. Are we ready to be the data center hub of the region? And what should be the first order of business on cybersecurity for the next president?
So I'll take it,
Very quick.
I'll
Go
take that first, right? So first, for data center hub, I think we do have manpower, talent, we do have real estate, and we do have the willingness to do it. And I think the major players have already made major investments, right? So the large telecom companies here have made substantial investments in that space. One of the things we have to pay attention to, though, is cost of power. That has always been a historical problem. Data centers are very power intensive. So whenever we enter such an initiative, we have to make sure that we do have a decent amount of power. Any major data center operator will be concerned about their electricity bill. So that's one of the things that might be looked at. But definitely in all other aspects, we're okay. Now, size of market, we may not be that big, but doing it on behalf of other countries may work. We are, let's just say, we're geographically blessed as being the, the gateway to Asia, both nettographically and geographically. The fiber optic cables pass this part of the world. So it does make sense, actually, to be that. Maybe some of the initiatives that can be had is, use of sustainable energy might be a good step. We are blessed with a lot of sunlight and wind, which I think will solve the power issue. Now, on the second point, I did write an article, I think, about what I would suggest the next president would do. But definitely, the 3 points I mentioned a while ago are the minimum, right? Protect critical infrastructure, right? Improve reporting, and of course, capability building. Secretary Kaintik also mentioned it a while ago. We are drafting an EO actually for that as well. So we're starting at the basics, right? And I hope that of course, I wish the current administration would pass it, but if not, the next administration, because this is one of those issues that I think should not be partisan, right? It can cross political lines, and I think it's important for all.
All right. Thank you, Grace.
Sorry, just to add, yes, thank you. William mentioned the cost of power, but hearing from those in the countryside, it's also important to have clean power. Fluctuations in power is in electricity is very important because it can damage facilities. So for to have data centers and have data hubs, not only in Metro Manila or Luzon, but in other provinces as well, we need to make sure that our power is clean. And the second point, which you mentioned earlier, is also having all these investment in data centers. But I would like to emphasize, being also an advocate of better internet PH, that we need to have more telco neutral facilities, telco neutral data centers. We need to diversify, actually, because as William mentioned, we do not want to have a single point of attack. And if all of these facilities are owned by telcos, the big telcos, then we might have a problem in the long run. So I'm very glad to hear that data centers that are not affiliated to the current telcos are also entering the market. So diversification is actually a good thing for promoting cybersecurity and resilience.
And Grace, first order of business for the next president, what do you think?
Well, William mentioned it earlier that we do hope that either this administration or the next president would issue an executive order.
Okay.
Why is that important? Because it is a directive from the chief executive himself. If we want to look at cybersecurity on a sectoral level, we need to make sure that the heads of government agencies are, of course, on board. And we need to emphasize that the DICT will be the lead in putting in place standards, but then having organizations have their own policy and protocol to make sure that their operation and their personnel are in line with these standards is very important. So the EO definitely would be the first order of business.
All right. Thank you, Grace and William. And thank you so much to our audience members for a very engaging discussion. If you have more questions or inquiries about the report, please email secure.connections.ph@gmail.com.